World War II shaped cinema forever. But the greatest war films aren't always the ones Hollywood celebrates. Did you know one forgotten masterpiece was filmed with actual World War II veterans just months after fighting ended? Or that another was banned in 6 countries for showing the enemy as human? We're uncovering 15 jaw-dropping war classics that deserve your attention. When Trumpets Fade, 1990, HBO dropped this brutal masterpiece in the late 90 seconds when everyone was obsessing over Saving Private Ryan, and somehow it got completely buried. Set during the Battle of Hurtgen Forest, this unflinching film follows Private Manning, who gets promoted when his entire squad is obliterated. This reluctant survivor is forced to lead fresh-faced kids into what historians literally called a meat grinder with zero strategic value. Director John Irvin doesn't give you pretty heroics or inspiring speeches. Instead, you get mud, blood, and the crushing weight of command as Manning realizes he's just feeding more bodies into a meaningless slaughter. Ron Eldard delivers a career-defining performance as a soldier who's neither hero nor coward, just a broken man trying to survive. The battle sequences are absolutely relentless. No dramatic music swells, no slow-motion heroics, just chaotic, deafening combat that feels sickeningly real. HBO actually worried the film was too bleak for audiences, which is why it never got the theatrical release it deserved. Critics who actually saw it were stunned. The New York Times called it unflinchingly honest, in ways that big-budget war films rarely are. Military veterans praise it as one of the most accurate portrayals of combat fatigue. One former infantry sergeant famously said, "This isn't Band of Brothers glory. This is what war actually feels like when you're in it." What makes this film truly special is how it shows the psychological transformation. Manning starts desperate to escape, then grudgingly accepts responsibility, only to finally become the very thing he hated, an officer willing to sacrifice lives for mission completion. It's a devastating character arc, rarely captured this authentically in war cinema. Decision Before Dawn, 1951. This Oscar-nominated masterpiece from 1951 has somehow vanished from film history, despite being one of the most daring World War II movies ever made. Shot in bombed-out German cities just 5 years after the war ended, it follows a German POW who agrees to spy for Americans against his own country. The film's bombed-out landscapes aren't sets or special effects. They're actual German cities still in ruins. Director Anatol Litvak took enormous risks filming in occupied Germany when anti-American sentiment was still rampant. The crew faced constant threats, and several scenes had to be abandoned when locals became hostile. The film's lead, Oskar Werner, actually fought in Hitler's army before deserting, bringing haunting authenticity to his role as a conflicted German soldier. What's mind-blowing is how morally complex this film was for 1951. While most post-war movies portrayed Germans as one-dimensional villains, Decision Before Dawn shows ordinary Germans caught between loyalty, survival, and moral awakening, where the protagonist confronts a disabled German veteran about their shared responsibility was so controversial that theaters in 3 southern states refused to show it. Critics were divided along political lines. Conservative reviewers called it dangerously sympathetic to the enemy, while the progressive press praised its unprecedented moral courage. Despite earning a Best Picture nomination, the film disappeared from circulation for decades. Deemed too uncomfortable for Cold War America's simplified view of World War II, the film's most powerful achievement, it was one of the first American productions to employ German actors. The Unknown Soldier, 2017. Finland dropped a war epic in 2017 that puts Hollywood's big-budget spectacles to shame. The Unknown Soldier, a 3-hour immersion into Finland's continuation war against the Soviet Union, delivers a brutal, unflinching portrait of combat that American studios would never dare make. No heroic speeches, no dramatic music swells, just the grinding psychological toll of men pushed beyond breaking point. Director Aku Luhemies spent $7 million, Finland's biggest film budget ever, to recreate the hellish conditions Finnish soldiers faced fighting the Red Army. The production team built miles of trenches, used real explosives, and filmed through the brutal Nordic winter, temperatures dropping to -30 degrees. Several actors were hospitalized with hypothermia, but refused to quit because, as one put it, our grandfathers endured worse for years. What sets this film apart is its refusal to choose sides. Finnish soldiers commit atrocities, Soviet troops show unexpected humanity, and the line between hero and monster blurs completely. One haunting sequence shows Finnish soldiers discovering Soviet prisoners, a scene based on documented incidents, Finland's official history. Critics called it war filmmaking at its most authentic, with Finland's leading newspaper declaring it finally shows the war our grandfathers couldn't speak about. The film broke every box office record in Finnish history, with nearly 1/5 of the country's population seeing it in theaters. Most American war films give you distance from horror through stylization. The Unknown Soldier strips that away completely. When soldiers die, the camera lingers uncomfortably on their faces. When men break down, there's no inspirational turning point. As one Finnish veteran who saw the film said, "This is the first time I've seen my memories on screen. Not what people wish had happened, but what actually did." The Captain, 2017. In the dying days of World War II, a teenage German deserter finds a Nazi captain's abandoned uniform, puts it on, and unleashes absolute hell. That's the terrifying premise of The Captain, a 2017 German film shot in stark black and white that delivers one of the most disturbing portraits of how power corrupts ever committed to film. Based on the true story of Willie Harold, nicknamed the Executioner of Emsland, this nightmare follows a 19-year-old deserter who transforms from hunted prey to predator simply by changing clothes. Director Robert Schwentke made the brilliant decision to film in monochrome, creating a moral wasteland where the uniform, not the man, commands absolute authority. The film's most shocking aspect is how quickly others fall in line behind this fake captain. Soldiers, officials, even other officers, immediately obey his increasingly sadistic orders without question. In the film's most devastating sequence, Harold orders the execution of 70 fellow deserters at Aschendorfer Moor prison camp, a massacre that actually happened in April 1945. Critics called it a horror film disguised as a war movie, with The Guardian noting it was closer to Lord of the Flies than Schindler's List. German audiences were particularly disturbed, with walkouts reported at several screenings. One elderly viewer in Berlin reportedly shouted, "This is too real. This is how it was." What makes The Captain truly unforgettable is its final sequence. After showing these World War II atrocities, Schwentke cuts to modern Germany. The Train, 1960. John Frankenheimer's The Train isn't just a great war movie. It's one of the most insanely dangerous productions in film history. Burt Lancaster, at 50 years old, performed stunts that would terrify today's insurance companies as he plays a French resistance fighter trying to prevent Nazis from stealing priceless art treasures by train. The film's production story is almost more incredible than the movie itself. After director Arthur Penn was fired just days into shooting, Frankenheimer took over and completely reimagined the film as an action spectacle. Instead of using miniatures or special effects, he crashed actual trains at full speed. That massive locomotive derailment, you see? That's a real 250-ton train demolished in a single take. Crew members placed bets on whether someone would die during filming. Lancaster, a former circus acrobat, insisted on doing his own stunts despite the studio's objections. He performed that jaw-dropping scene where he jumps between moving train cars, dislocated his shoulder, and kept filming anyway. During one explosive sequence, a special effects mishap sent shrapnel flying everywhere, narrowly missing Lancaster's face by inches. Critics initially underestimated the film as just another action movie, but its reputation has grown enormously. Martin Scorsese called it the last truly great black-and-white action film, while Christopher Nolan studied its practical effects sequences. The film's box office was modest, at $3 million against a $5.8 million budget, but it's now considered Frankenheimer's masterpiece. What makes the train special beyond its spectacular action? The Eternal Zero, 2013. Japan dropped a cinematic bombshell in 2013, The Eternal Zero, a film so controversial it became the country's biggest box office hit, while simultaneously being condemned by critics across the political spectrum. This emotional gut punch follows modern Japanese siblings discovering their grandfather was a kamikaze pilot, forcing them to confront their nation's wartime legacy. Director Takashi Yamazaki created stunning aerial combat sequences that rival anything Hollywood has produced, engaging American planes in breathtakingly realistic dogfights. But the film's real power comes from its psychological portrait of kamikaze pilots, showing them not as fanatical warriors, but as terrified young men forced into suicide missions against their will. The controversy exploded because the film dared to humanize a subject Japan still struggles to process. Right-wing nationalists attacked it for suggesting kamikaze pilots were reluctant rather than willing martyrs. Left-wing critics accused it of whitewashing Japan's wartime aggression. Studio Ghibli founder Hayao Miyazaki famously called it a pack of lies that beautified a horrific chapter in Japanese history. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, The Eternal Zero earned over $80 million in Japan alone. Audiences wept openly during screenings. For many younger Japanese viewers, it was their first real engagement with a history. What makes this film particularly fascinating is how it structures its narrative through conflicting memories. Each veteran the siblings interview gives a completely different account of their grandfather, forcing viewers to question the reliability of historical memory itself. As one Japanese film scholar noted, it's not trying to offer definitive answers about kamikaze pilots. It's asking how we should remember them at all. Dunkirk, 1958. 15 years before Nolan's blockbuster, this 1958 British classic delivered a Dunkirk evacuation story with documentary-like authenticity and emotional impact that modern CGI can't match. Shot on the actual beaches, where the rescue happened just 18 years earlier, this forgotten masterpiece used real evacuation veterans as extras and consultants, creating an atmosphere of lived experience no modern film can replicate. Director Leslie Norman took the unprecedented step of telling the story from dual perspectives: stranded soldiers on the beach and the civilian boat owners who sailed into danger to rescue them. This narrative innovation, which Nolan would later adopt, was revolutionary for 1950 war cinema. John Mills delivers a career-defining performance as a cynical corporal trying to get his men home, while Richard Attenborough plays a factory worker whose journey from selfish cowardice to heroism captures Britain's national mythology about the evacuation. The film's most extraordinary achievement was its massive scale before the era of CGI. For the beach sequences, Norman assembled over 1,000 extras, many of whom had actually been at Dunkirk in 1940. These men weren't acting, they were reliving the most traumatic experience of their lives. During one evacuation scene, filming had to stop because several veterans broke down in tears. Critics initially dismissed it as too soon to dramatize such recent history. Guardian called it ghoulish entertainment made from fresh graves, making it the second highest-grossing film in Britain that year. Veterans organizations almost unanimously praised its accuracy, with one Dunkirk survivor writing, "They captured the waiting, fear, the small acts of kindness that kept us human." The Rats of Tobruk, 1944, Australia, created this raw, unflinching desert warfare masterpiece, while World War II was still raging, making it possibly the only major World War II combat film shot with the actual sound of distant battle, sometimes audible on the soundtrack. Following three mates who volunteered to defend the Libyan port of Tobruk during the brutal 242-day siege by Rommel's forces, this forgotten classic shows ordinary soldiers becoming the rats who burrowed into the desert to survive relentless bombardment. Director Charles Chauvel filmed in actual Australian desert locations under punishing conditions, temperatures reaching 120 degrees. What's mind-blowing is that many cast members were actual serving soldiers on brief leave from combat duty in the Pacific theater. These weren't actors playing soldiers. They were warriors, temporarily portraying versions of themselves. The film's most powerful sequences show the psychological transformation of men under extreme duress. Unlike American war films of the era with their rah-rah patriotism, the Rats of Tobruk shows soldiers cracking under pressure, experiencing hallucinations from dehydration, and questioning why they're fighting at all. One harrowing scene depicts a soldier's breakdown after continuous shelling, a portrayal of combat stress that was decades ahead of its time. Initially dismissed it as crude propaganda, but Australian audiences made it the country's highest-grossing film of 1944. For Australians, The Defence of Tobruk represented their first major independent contribution to the war effort, a psychological turning point in the nation's journey from British dominion to self-determined country. Ill Met, by Moonlight, 1957. Before there was Inglourious Basterds, this true story of Nazi hunting audacity delivered one of the most outrageous actual World War II operations ever filmed. Directed by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, the legendary team behind classics like The Red Shoes, this forgotten gem follows British agents and Greek resistance fighters who kidnap a German general from Nazi-occupied and embarrass Hitler's entire military machine. Dirk Bogarde stars as Patrick Lee Fermor, the real British officer who masterminded this insane operation, bringing his trademark intensity to a role that requires him to be both gentleman scholar and ruthless commando. What's incredible is how accurately the film portrays this seemingly impossible mission. The real Fermor served as technical advisor, right down to the wine they drank while waiting to ambush the general's car, who gradually develops Stockholm Syndrome, bonding with his captors during their harrowing 18-day journey. This psychological complexity was revolutionary for 1950 war cinema, which typically portrayed Germans as one-dimensional villains. When Fermor and Crype discover they can both recite Horace in Latin, they share a moment of cultural connection that transcends the war, a scene based on what actually happened. Critics at the time praised its technical achievements, but missed its deeper significance. The New York Times called it a ripping adventure yarn, without recognizing how it subverted war movie conventions by focusing on a mission that had no strategic value beyond humiliating the enemy. Modern film scholars have reassessed it as a subtle critique of imperial hubris disguised as a thrilling caper. Shot on location in actual Cretan villages where the resistance operated, the film captures the stark beauty of the landscape. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. Richard Attenborough assembled Hollywood's biggest stars to recreate Operation Market Garden, history's largest airborne disaster, and delivered one of the most expensive box office bombs of the 1970s. But this commercial failure is actually one of the most brutally honest war films ever made, showing in painstaking detail how Allied overconfidence and poor planning led to catastrophic defeat. The film's $25 million budget was astronomical, allowing Attenborough to stage massive battle sequences with real aircraft, tanks, and thousands of extras. The cast reads like a who's who of 70-second cinema. But unlike most star-studded epics, these actors portray leaders making fatal mistakes and soldiers dying pointlessly, heroes achieving glorious victory. What makes A Bridge Too Far revolutionary is its unflinching portrayal of Allied failure. Released when America was still processing Vietnam, it shows British and American commanders ignoring intelligence, dismissing warnings, and sending men to certain death through arrogance and poor planning. One devastating sequence shows paratroopers dropping directly into German gun sites because commanders refused to change drop zones, a scene so disturbing that veterans of the actual battle. The Winter War, 1989. Finland created this brutal masterpiece about their desperate 1939 defense against Soviet invasion, and it remains one of the most unflinching portraits of outgunned soldiers ever filmed. Following two farmer brothers drafted to defend their homeland against Stalin's overwhelming forces, the Winter War shows men fighting at -40 degrees with minimal equipment against the world's largest army. Director Pekka Parikka created battle sequences of stunning authenticity by filming during Finland's actual winter months, with actors enduring the same brutal conditions their characters faced. The production used genuine World War II-era equipment, including captured Soviet T-26 tanks, still functional after 50 years. One actor actually got frostbite during filming and refused medical evacuation. "I can handle this." What makes this film exceptional is its unflinching portrayal of Finland's desperate tactics. With Soviet forces outnumbering them 3 to 1-inch men and 3 0 to 1-inch tanks, Finnish soldiers created improvised explosives, used skiing hit-and-run attacks, and developed the notorious Molotov cocktail specifically for this conflict. The film shows the invention of these, including the devastating psychological impact of watching friends freeze to death when supplies ran out. Critics internationally praised its brutal realism, with Roger Ebert calling it war filmmaking that makes Saving Private Ryan look like a recruiting poster. Come and See, 1985. Soviet director Elim Klimov created possibly the most disturbing anti-war film ever made. A nightmare journey through Nazi-occupied Belarus that makes Saving Private Ryan look like a Disney movie. Following teenage boy Flyora as he joins partisans fighting Germans, Come and See gradually transforms from war drama to psychological horror as it depicts the systematic genocide of Belarusian villages by SS death squads. The production's backstory is almost as disturbing as the film itself. Klimov spent 8 years fighting Soviet censors to make this unflinchingly brutal account of German atrocities. The title comes from the Book of Revelation, referencing the apocalypse, and Klimov used real ammunition during filming, with bullets literally flying inches from actors' heads. Lead actor Alexei Kravchenko was just 14 years old, and the director used hypnosis to help him cope with the traumatic scenes. What makes this film uniquely devastating is its refusal to aestheticize violence. When Nazi soldiers lock villagers in a church and burn them alive, Klimov doesn't cut away or stylize the horror. The camera forces you to witness humanity at its worst, creating an almost unbearable viewing experience. The film's most shattering technique is its sound design, with a constant ringing replacing normal audio as Flyora's hearing is damaged by explosions, creating a disorienting, nightmarish atmosphere. Critics worldwide have called it the most honest war film ever made. It's so overwhelming that it has never found the audience it deserves. When finally screened at Cannes, years after completion, multiple viewers required medical attention after fainting. Soviet authorities initially restricted its distribution, fearing it was too traumatic for general audiences. The film's final sequence shows something no Hollywood war film would dare: a reverse chronology of Hitler's life, from corpse back to innocent baby. Canal, 1957. Polish director Andrzej Wajda created cinema's most claustrophobic nightmare with this second installment of his war trilogy, following the doomed fighters of the 1944 Warsaw Uprising as they retreat into the city's sewers in a desperate attempt to escape Nazi forces. Shot in actual Warsaw locations still devastated by the war, Canal, meaning sewer in Polish, was the first film to show the uprising that claimed over 200,000 Polish lives. Who fought in the Polish resistance as a teenager brings unbearable authenticity to this journey into literal and metaphorical hell. The film's first half establishes the resistance fighters as individuals with dreams and personalities before submerging them in the sewers, where their humanity is systematically stripped away. The cinematography is revolutionary, with much of the film shot in near-total darkness, illuminated only by matches and flashlights, creating a suffocating visual experience decades ahead of its time. What makes Canal particularly devastating is that it was made under communist rule when the Warsaw Uprising was still a forbidden topic in Poland. The Soviet army had deliberately halted outside Warsaw, allowing the Nazis to crush the non-communist Polish resistance. By telling this story at all, Wajda was risking his career and possibly his freedom. He later revealed that government censors only allowed the film because they believed the sewer setting was sufficiently metaphorical rather than directly political. When Canal premiered at the 1957 Cannes Film Festival, it won the Special Jury Prize and reduced audiences to stunned silence.